When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Make cars safer with seat belts and airbags, and people drive more recklessly. Put helmets on football players and they launch themselves head first at other players' heads. This is the Peltzman effect. When safety measures reduce the perceived risk, people complicate this by taking even greater risks. We maintain a constant level of acceptable danger, and we adjust our behavior to preserve it, even in the face of new safety measures. So in disagreements about safety, rules, and protection, the Peltzman effect means our solutions can often, not always, but often create the problems they're actually meant to solve. The Peltzman effect complicates parenting debates. For instance, if you give kids helmets, they'll bike more dangerously, perhaps. Create safe spaces and they take emotional risks they wouldn't otherwise. Implement strict rules and they find riskier ways to rebel. Every safety measure changes behavior in ways that partially offset the benefits. Parents fighting about protection levels rarely consider how safety measures might actually encourage the very dangers they're trying to prevent. Workplace safety initiatives can show Peltzman effects as well. Install better backup systems and people become careless about saving their work. Implement elaborate checking procedures and individuals pay less attention. And in relationships, emotional safety measures can really backfire. The partner who constantly reassures might actually enable insecurity rather than reducing it. And the friend who's always cushioning bad news might encourage denial rather than resilience. The parent who protects from all consequences might create dependency rather than competence or independence. Sometimes the best intentions can create a backfire effect, and understanding the Peltzman effect changes how we approach safety and rules. Instead of just adding protections, consider how behavior might adapt. Instead of making things completely safe or trying to, maybe maintain enough risk to encourage caution. And in disagreements, remember that people aren't passive recipients. They actively adjust their behavior to maintain their preferred risk level. Sometimes the safest approach acknowledges that perfect safety is impossible. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Radia Baxter. Radia is an advocate for people who aren't given a second chance. She's a mom whose work is inspired by a quest to achieve what she calls significant success. Radia, tell us an argument story.
So good morning, Dr. Lee. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of this podcast today. So as I was thinking about your topic, when we disagree, what would be a core disagreement for me? And so I thought about it, and the one thing that came to my mind was when we want economic development and surplus wealth, but we don't want to provide the tools and access or opportunities for all people to succeed significantly. And so, I thought about that, and I was like, well, it's like I couldn't understand how we want, wealth, and we want growth, and we want, to be at a certain level, but we only want to provide those tools, the access and those opportunities to a certain core group. And in order for us to grow together as a community, as a municipalities, as a state, as a nation, as a world, everybody has to be incorporated. We can't just move the needle with just focusing on one group of people.
Who is this disagreement between equality of access, equality of resources, and equality of outcome between?
So I think it's between a whole bunch of different demographics, right? So you have class, you have gender, you have race, you have thoughts, you have geographical locations, you have wealth, you have social norms. You have, it could even be as far as like institutions, systems, behaviors, so I think it's a whole bunch of different index cards on on a oblong, square, rectangle table, so it's like all over the place. It's like a different spider web with multi different layers, multi different connections, disconnections, alignments, not aligned, fair access, not fair, not equitable, just several different colors.
Can you tell us a story from your life that would help us understand why you care about this dispute so much?
So I'm great that you brought that point up. Everybody considers a successful family is the mom and dad who went to college, who got married, bought a house, had children. Then their children go on to be educated and, get a job, blah, 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 in their career. Well, I grew up with a mom and a dad who got married, who went to college, owned a house, military family background. But I ended up getting pregnant when I was a teenager. And so most of my parents' peers and colleagues and friends, and of course, along with my parents, were disappointed. And so I have firsthand advocacy or firsthand of how to speak truth to power when it comes to that experience. I had so many people doubt me, that I wouldn't be successful because of the lens that I was in now, right? So I had to figure out, okay, I got all these people who said at first they supported me, now they're naysayers. But how do I navigate through this process to ensure that my son at the time, and now my sons and my daughter will be significantly successful? So, and so just to start off with a little bit of background, my mom got married when she was 30. At 30, right. I'd already had 3 kids, right? And was getting ready to go through a divorce at the time because I got married when I was 21. Right. So, there's one difference, right? I went to college early, started college when I was 16. I'm very intellectually smart, all of those things, but I just ended up making a wrong decision that became very impactful for my life. And so I had to figure out, I came to the College of Charleston. I had opportunities to go to College of Charleston, Wofford, LSU, but I ended up in Charleston, and that's when I started attending College of Charleston, and then I became pregnant. And so I'm like, okay, what do I do? How do I raise my son, given in the space that I am in, a single teenage mom, give him the best world that I can, right? And then not only that, we're Black. Right. So now we're talking about raising a Black boy in the holy city, in the South. Right. How do I do that and do it well? Right. With Christian backgrounds, all of that, your parents, all of that. And so one thing that I did is I thought about community. Right. I am my grandfather was the first Black farmer in Summerton, South Carolina. Underneath, he did a lot of work with the board versus the Brown versus the Board of Education. He has told me stories of how he used to put my mom and them on the back of his truck, cover it with a tarp just to get them to school. So civil engagement and advocacy has already been in me. Community is already within me. So how do I take those principles and that framework and continue that to raise my kids right here in Charleston, South Carolina? And with that being said, and under that leadership, I started driving cab. And I was like, I got to know this community. And so not for economic base, because back then, and I say that word loosely because my daughter is like back then could be 1900s. but at that point, the wages was like $10, $8, right? But it wasn't for the wages. It was to truly be significantly successful in the upbringing of my kids to know the community. And I learned Charleston, the geographical part of it, the social part of it, the community building. And I want to say that's one of the frameworks that has led me to where I'm at today when you're talking about transformational leadership. My kids are extremely successful. My oldest son, who I talk a lot about, and I talk about my kids, all of the three of them. So I don't want them to, when they hear this podcast, to be like, we know one on the other. But my oldest son graduated from Howard University with a mechanical engineer degree. And he just recently got a degree from LSU in international business as a master's, and he's getting ready to turn 27. My middle son graduated from South Carolina State with a mass communications and sports management degree, and he currently works for South Carolina State in their 4-H program. And then my baby, as I call her, she goes to North Carolina A&T in her sophomore year, doing phenomenal in a nursing degree. So I would consider that first thing of ensuring that I provide the framework and principles of a foundation and then build upon it to ensure that my kids are doing well for themselves. I've done at least a quarter part of it. And so that's advocacy on that level. And in my community, I have built connections and relationships for not my kids, but for folks, so that way that they can trust themselves as individuals to be better than what they are. So going back to your question, those kind of things that I have done along the way and learned and taught myself, I have also taught others to be in those spaces, to access those opportunities, or to even provide those opportunities for others that are like me, that deserve a second chance to be better than what we thought we were or could be, but we know just intrinsically that we are.
What are some of the biggest challenges you face in advocating for people who aren't given a second chance?
So I think it's twofold. One is getting them to believe, to see their true power, to see their value, to see, not what is in front of them. Like I talk a little bit about people where you got to learn how to not just focus on the branches and the trees. You got to focus on the forest, right? So how to be concrete versus abstract. You got to look at the bigger picture. Sometimes it seems like it's a rough spot or this person, or you can't see the outcome later. But sometimes you got to trust yourself and believe in yourself and see that, I'm going through this rough spot, or I'm not able to access this point right now, but maybe it's because I need to be further learning more skills in my behavior, in education, and not as far as in academia, but just in knowing knowledge is power and knowing how to go through or move through those systems as you get to a point to the next level.
How do you separate, you talk about significant success. How do you, and the opening dispute we were talking about was about equality of economic opportunity, equality of resources, and economic development. How do you define success, full stop? And then to what extent do you define success as economic achievement?
So how do I define success? One, I think for me, it is to help somebody. I keep saying this, to me, for success is to get folks to trust themselves to be better than what they are. And it could be me. How do I get myself to trust myself better than what I am? Because you got to start within yourself first. And it could be, access to, let's just use the College of Charleston, for example. When I first came here in 97, I didn't truly fully understand my value and the opportunities that I had within there to make certain decisions, right? When 20 years later, I understood that, and I understood the value that I had in that I needed to not only trust myself, but I needed to trust the College of Charleston. I needed to trust the professors. I needed to trust my kids, that they knew what journey we were on, so that way that I can effectively get to that point of graduation and be able to go to the next step. So that would be an example of that. Now, how to be significant with that is to bring others along, right? To get others to see I can be transformed within myself. So if I can do it, you can do it also. And understand that leadership is not just being, at the top. You've also got to be leadership on boots on the ground, right? You also got to show how you're not just, you're that builder, you're that connector, you're that engager, all through all levels. So to me, you got to be very impactful on the cognitive side more so. How do you get folks to change their way of thinking, right? Their mindset of truly being in tune with themselves and with their core beliefs, to know that I am a game changer, on so many different levels, not just on the top level. That sounds great, but to be truly a game changer at the bottom level, where you can just open a peep of a window, and that's an opportunity, and that's access to the opportunity. And then for the folks who have the opportunities and have the access to open it for others, for them to open the window a little bit more, so that other folks can jump in that window and see that, oh, I opened that access or that opportunity. That's alignment. That's strategic alignment and it's strategic building.
You use a word that I talk about a lot, and so I want to ask you more about it, which is trust. You open this episode by talking about those who don't have much, and then how can we figure out a way as a culture to promote, as you said, economic development, to give folks greater access to the slice of the pie, or to the full pie. But then you just talked about trust, and that at some point you're trying to get people to A, trust themselves, and B, to trust others. And it's the trust others piece that I wonder if we could talk about for a moment. How do we get greater trust in our community? And then how do you get those who haven't been dealt the greatest hand in life to trust systems and other people, other communities, et cetera, that don't seem aligned with them?
So you bring up a great point. So a part of my career, I was the director of programs at the Charleston County Sheriff's Office for the detention center. Uh-huh. And, at the detention center, it's a jail, so it's pre-sentencing. But one of the things is how do you get justice-involved folks to see the other side of where they're at now, right? And that is through truly providing programming opportunities so they can look cognitively beyond that. And so one of the ways, just imagine me, I'm 5'2", I'm short. Some people say I look like I'm 12, to go into a facility of folks who have been charged with so many different offenses, right? And have had so many different life experiences, to get them to understand, hey, I am here with you, for you, to get you better. And what I did is I called them maybe I think it was about 20 of them in a room. And I was like, hey, I think that in order to get you to a different spot cognitively and also education-wise, I need you to participate in this program. I said, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy. First of all, I'm a woman and it's all male gender, right? And okay. I look like I'm 12 again. And they're like, we don't know you. How do we trust you? And I said, well, I want you to take a ride with me. And I let them in on a little bit of my experience, right? Because usually when you let folks know what you've experienced and that you have some kind of alignment or that, then they can see themselves a little bit differently. And so we talked about, I had them have a seat at the table. That's number one with trust. When you want folks to be a part of a movement or a journey or a program or however, an opportunity, you have to have their voices heard and have them have a seat at the table. That was number one. Number two, I again showed them a little part of me that let them know that I do have somewhat of a learned experience or behavior, not being an orange jumpsuit or something like that, but just in my life experiences. And number 3, I shook their hand. Okay, when we talked about how this would look, I looked them in the eye and I shook their hand and gave them my word that this experience would be unique and different, and that I had their backs, but I needed them to have their own backs, and I needed them to put in integrity, loyalty, and all of that goes into it with it, and to trust me, to trust them. And that when that happened, I was able to get them to, okay, let's go, let's move, let's get ready for this movement and journey. And likewise, on the other side, for the people who were providing the opportunities, I had to get them at a seat of a table, had to hear their voices heard, because they have other experiences that they bring to the table. You know, how, if we're providing this program, are they going to accept us? You know, it's a lot of moving parts. But when you collectively get everybody at the seat of the table, get all voices to where they be heard, and get the understanding that we all can do this together, then we are significantly successful.
What was involved in the program, the juvenile detention program?
So it was more than just juveniles.
Oh, okay.
It was adults. And the programming included receiving their high school education, GED, skill building, career development. It was also being a part of, several of them took college classes from the College of Charleston, still taking it, from the Citadel. Can you imagine taking a critical thinking class by one of top students? I'm a top professor at the College of Charleston and at the Citadel. And some of them have never even received a certificate of attendance. So can you imagine what that opened? And they were allowed to explore, educate. They were allowed to be in the presence of a professor that just got through teaching a class in Germany, right, or just got through teaching a critical intelligence class. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that it was phenomenal. So those were the kind of opportunities, work keys, economic development. They even learned how to use a forklift. So that way, when they left the facility, they would have an opportunity to show, I have a certificate, I have a skill set that I can go ahead and get a job, so that I won't return to the behaviors that I were doing before, and I can provide for my family and be a great community and impactful member in the Charleston community, and that I can participate in public and community wellness.
It sounds to me like a lot of the trust-inspiring movements that you made with these folks was as a result of self-disclosure on your part.
Yeah, it was, you know, and a lot of people know me, I am extremely private. I just like the work to be done, right? But when I know that I have to do some self-discovery on myself, I had to. And I also had to show folks that look what happened to me. And now look where I'm at. Look where, you know, people that are aligned with me, look where, I mean, I worked on campaigns to, political campaigns where there have been state senators, representatives, council members, presidents, you know, just been in many different rooms. Community leaders. I have a lot of my mentees are phenomenal business leaders, phenomenal community leaders, are just phenomenal people. So, you know, it's just been amazing to be on that journey. And just, I mean, it's opened my eyes a lot for myself. And again, I've been very truly transparent and vulnerable in spaces that I probably didn't want to be. But it's well worth the journey because again, as you stated when we started, I am on a quest to be significantly successful, and however that looks, long as it's impactful and it's the right thing to do.
Radia Baxter, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
Thank you.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.